That was the moment I understood what my daughter had actually done. Not the moment she walked me through the front door of Pinebrook Gardens and smiled at the young woman behind the desk. Not when she carried my overnight bag up to room 14 and arranged my cardigan on the back of the chair like she was tucking in a child. Not even when she kissed my cheek and said, "Just a few days, Mom. Just until we figure things out." No. It was 3 days later when I found the Zillow listing on the common room computer. My house. My address. My front porch with the hanging fern I'd kept alive for 11 years. Listed at $387,000. Open house scheduled for that Saturday. I sat very still for a moment. The woman next to me was watching Family Feud. The volume was too loud. I remember thinking, how strange that the world can be ending and someone nearby is still laughing at a game show. Then I stood up, smoothed my slacks, and walked to the front desk. I should back up, because nothing about this makes sense unless you understand what kind of woman I am and what kind of life I had built. My name is Nora. I am 74 years old. I taught high school English for 31 years in Columbus, Ohio. I graded approximately 40,000 essays. I survived 2 principals I genuinely disliked, one of whom wore the same sweater every single Friday for a decade. I raised 2 children largely on my own after my husband, Ray, passed from a heart attack in 2009. I balanced a checkbook every Sunday morning until online banking made it unnecessary, and even then I kept the habit because I liked the clarity of it. I knew, at any given moment, exactly what I had and exactly what I owed. I was not a woman who lost track of things. My house on Clement Drive had been mine and Ray's since 1987. We bought it for $94,000 and nearly fainted at the mortgage payment. We repainted it 4 times. We replaced the furnace twice. Ray built the back deck himself the summer before he got sick, and I have not changed a single board of it since, because his handwriting is still there on the inside of the railing post where he marked the measurements. I know because I checked last October just to make sure it was still there. It was. That house was mine. Fully paid off since 2019. No liens, no debt, no complications. I kept the deed in a fireproof box in my bedroom closet, right next to Ray's watch and the letters he wrote me when he traveled for work. I need you to understand all of that before I tell you what my daughter did. Her name is Sasha. She is 46, lives in Westerville with her husband, and has always been the organized one, the planner. When her brother, my son Elliot, needs something remembered, he calls Sasha. When I needed someone to help me sort through Ray's things after he passed, it was Sasha who came, Sasha who made the lists, Sasha who labeled the boxes. I trusted her completely, which is, I think, exactly what she counted on. It started in January after I slipped on the back steps. I didn't break anything, just bruised my hip and my pride, but Sasha drove up from Westerville that same afternoon and didn't leave for 4 days. She made me doctor's appointments. She installed a grab bar in the bathroom. She sat across from me at my kitchen table with a legal pad and said, "Mom, we need to have a conversation about what happens if something more serious occurs." I said I appreciated the concern, but I was fine. She said, "You live alone. You're 74. What if you'd hit your head?" I said, "I didn't hit my head." She said, "But what if you had?" We went around like that for a while. I knew the conversation. I'd had versions of it with friends whose children were doing the same thing. It was the kind of conversation that felt like caring, but had a different shape underneath, if you looked at it long enough. I didn't look long enough. That's on me. In February, Sasha brought up Pinebrook Gardens. She said a colleague's mother had stayed there for a short transition period after knee surgery and had loved it. She said it wasn't a nursing home exactly, more of an assisted living community. She said they had a library, a garden, chair yoga on Tuesdays. She showed me the website on her phone. The photographs looked like a hotel. I said I didn't need any of that. She said, "It's not about needing it. It's about having a plan." Her husband, my son-in-law Russell, was there that evening. He's a quiet man, an accountant, and he mostly stayed out of conversations like this. But that night he said, very gently, "Nora, it might just give Sasha some peace of mind. And honestly, it would give us time to look at the house, maybe do a few updates, get it appraised, just so you know what you have." I asked why the house needed to be appraised. He said it was just smart financial planning. He said I should know what my assets were worth. I thought about it. I said I'd consider Pinebrook Gardens for a short visit, maybe a week, just to see. Looking back now, I can see how precisely that conversation was arranged. Every word, every pause. I can see Russell's part in it, which I did not see then because I was too busy being touched that he cared. I packed a bag in early March. Sasha said a week, maybe 10 days. She said she'd come visit on Wednesday. She drove me there herself, carried my bag, charmed the woman at the front desk, arranged my things in room 14. She left at 4:30 in the afternoon. The aide who brought my dinner that evening was a young woman named Precious. She had a gap between her front teeth, and she called me Miss Nora, and she was one of the only genuinely kind people I encountered there. I want to say that because what I'm about to describe is not her fault, and not the fault of most of the staff, who were simply doing their jobs. The first thing I noticed was the phone situation. My cell phone worked fine, but the signal in room 14 was poor. I had to stand near the window to make calls, and the window faced a courtyard where other residents sometimes sat, so there wasn't much privacy. When I asked the front desk about a landline, they said they could put one in, but it would take a few days to arrange. A few days turned into more than a week. When I asked Sasha about it on Wednesday, when she came as promised, she said, "Mom, just use your cell. I'll call you every day." She brought me a plant for the windowsill and a bag of the peppermint candies I like. She stayed for 2 hours and talked about everything except the house. I asked her directly, "What's happening with the house?" She said, "Nothing yet. Russell's just been getting some quotes for the updates we talked about." I said, "What updates? I didn't agree to any updates." She said, "Just cosmetic things, new light fixtures, that sort of thing. It'll increase the value." I said, "The value for what purpose?" She looked at me the way you look at someone who is being difficult on purpose. She said, "For your future, Mom. For your options. I want to tell you about my roommate, because she matters." Her name was Abigail, and she was 81, and she had been at Pinebrook Gardens for 14 months. She had a daughter in Phoenix who called on birthdays and a son in Atlanta who had signed her in and not been back since. She was sharp as anything. Did the crossword in pen? Finished before I did. But somewhere along the way, someone had told everyone she wasn't. And now it was in her file. And the file was what people believed. On my 5th evening there, after lights down, Abigail said, very quietly from her bed, "You're not staying, are you?" I said I was only supposed to be there a week. She said, "That's what I said." I lay there in the dark for a long time after that. It was the 10th day when I found the listing. I had gone to the common room early, before most residents were up, because I wanted to use the computer without anyone looking over my shoulder. I'd been having a feeling, the same feeling I used to get when a student's essay didn't quite add up, when the argument was smooth, but the evidence was missing. I wanted to look at the county auditor's website, just to check. I typed in my address. There it was. Not on the auditor's site, I found that later, but first on Zillow, because Zillow pulled up as an autofill suggestion. And when I saw my address in that search bar, I clicked on it without thinking. $307,000. Listed 6 days ago. 4 photographs. My kitchen with the new pendant lights I had not chosen and did not want. My living room with Ray's recliner removed. My back deck, raised deck, with a potted plant placed precisely where he used to sit. The open house was in 4 days. I closed the browser tab. I sat completely still. I looked at the woman watching Family Feud. Then I stood up, smoothed my slacks, and walked to the front desk. The young man at the desk that morning was named Marcus. No, wait, his name was Darnell. I want to get this right because he was kind to me and he deserves to have his name said correctly. Darnell was 23, maybe 24, working the early shift, and he had his phone out under the counter, which I pretended not to notice. I said, "Darnell, may I use your phone for a moment? I need to make a local call and mine isn't getting signal." He looked up. He said, I'm not really supposed to." I said, "It's to an attorney. It will take less than 5 minutes." Something in my voice, I think. He pushed the phone across the desk without another word. I had the number memorized. Not because I expected this. I want to be clear about that. I had it memorized because Ray always said to keep 3 numbers in your head: your doctor, your accountant, and your lawyer. Ray was practical that way. The lawyer I called was a woman named Christine Haley, who had done our estate planning back in 2011 and updated my will in 2021. I had not spoken to her in almost 2 years. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I said, "Christine, this is Nora Whitfield. I'm at an assisted living facility called Pinebrook Gardens on Morse Road, and I believe my daughter may have listed my house for sale without my authorization. I need you to tell me what I need to do right now, this morning." There was a brief silence. Then she said, "Nora, stay exactly where you are. Don't sign anything. Don't let them tell you it's a misunderstanding. I'm going to make some calls and I'll be there by noon." I slid the phone back to Darnell. I said, "Thank you." He looked at me for a moment. He said, "You okay, Miss Nora?" I said, "I will be." Christine arrived at 11:47. She came with a colleague, a younger man who specialized in elder law, and she came with printed copies of things I had not known existed. A document dated February 28th, signed in what appeared to be my handwriting, granting Sasha limited power of attorney over my real property. I had not signed it. I had not been asked to sign it. I had not seen it. I did not recognize the notary's seal, which Christine said they would be looking into. She sat across from me in the small meeting room Pinebrook provided, and she laid the documents on the table between us, and she said very carefully, "Nora, I want to make sure I understand. You have no memory of signing this." I said I did not sign this. I would remember. She said, "I believe you." Those 3 words, "I believe you." I had not realized how much I needed to hear them until I did. What followed was not fast. I want to be honest about that because the part of stories like this that people sometimes get wrong is the resolution. They make it sound clean, make it sound like a switch being flipped. It was not. Christine filed for an emergency injunction to halt the sale. That happened within 48 hours before the open house. The listing came down. The real estate agent, who turned out to be someone Sasha had used before and who claimed not to have known anything, was irregular, cooperated immediately when contacted by Christine's office. The document, the forged power of attorney, went to a forensic document examiner. The notary, it turned out, was Russell's cousin. The seal had been borrowed or stolen, depending on which account you believed, which became relevant later when the cousin's own attorney got involved. I was discharged from Pinebrook Gardens on a Thursday. Darnell was at the desk when I left. I shook his hand and told him he'd done a kind thing. He looked a little embarrassed and said he hoped things worked out. I went home. The pendant lights were still there, the ones Sasha had installed without asking me. I stood in my kitchen looking at them for a while. Then I got a step stool from the pantry and took them down myself. I put the old fixtures back up. It took me the better part of an afternoon, and I was proud of every minute of it. Abigail. I called Christine about Abigail 2 days after I got home. I told her about the crossword puzzles, about the file that said things that weren't true, about 14 months when her son had not visited. Christine said it was outside what she handled directly, but she gave me the name of a legal aid organization that worked specifically on elder care cases, and I called them that same day. I am not going to tell you that story had a neat ending because I don't know yet how it ends. What I know is that Abigail's situation is being looked at now by people whose job it is to look at things like this, and that is more than was happening before. The question I get asked most when I tell this story is, what happened to Sasha? I'll tell you what I know factually. She and Russell were investigated for elder financial abuse under Ohio Revised Code Section 2913.02. Russell's cousin, the notary, faced separate proceedings related to misuse of his seal. The real estate transaction never completed, so there was no money that changed hands to recover, only the attempt. Whether charges were ultimately filed and what came of them is something I'm not going to discuss in detail, because there are legal matters still unresolved and my attorney has advised me accordingly. What I will tell you is that I have not spoken to Sasha since a brief and very controlled conversation in Christine's office in April. I do not know when or whether I will speak to her again. What I know is this. She was counting on me to be confused. She was counting on me to defer, the way she'd watched me defer to systems and institutions all my life, because I'd been raised to be polite, raised to not make a fuss, raised to believe that the people in charge usually knew best. She had watched me for 46 years, and she knew every one of my habits, and she used them like a blueprint. What she did not count on was that I'd spent 31 years teaching teenagers to read carefully, to look at what a text was actually saying underneath what it appeared to be saying, to ask, what is the author's purpose here? What are they not telling you? What did they want you to believe, and why? She forgot that I taught that. She forgot maybe that I believed it. My son Elliot drove up from Cincinnati the weekend after I got home. He sat on Ray's deck with me and we had coffee, and he didn't say much for a while. Then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry I wasn't paying more attention." I said, "You have your own life." He said, "That's not an excuse." We sat there a while longer. A cardinal landed on the railing. They do that, have always done that. I don't know why this spot draws them, and we both watched it. He said, "What do you need?" I said, "I already have what I need. I have this house. I have Ray's deck. I have a good lawyer." He laughed a little at that. I said, "What I want is for people to know that just because someone is old doesn't mean they're finished, doesn't mean they don't notice, doesn't mean they won't fight." Elliot said, "I think people are going to know that about you. If you are watching this and you have a parent who lives alone, please hear me. Call them. Not to arrange things, not to plan, just to talk. Ask what they're reading. Ask what they had for lunch. Ask if the cardinal is still coming to the back deck. And if you are watching this and you are the one living alone, if you are the one your children worry about or pretend to worry about, please hear me too. Know your numbers. Keep 3 in your head: your doctor, your accountant, your lawyer. Don't let anyone tell you that a signature you don't remember signing is still your signature. Don't let anyone tell you that confusion you don't feel is still confusion. You are allowed to push back. You are allowed to ask for the phone. You are allowed to make the call. I stood at that front desk on a Tuesday morning in March, and I was 74 years old, and my hip still ached a little. And I made the call. That was enough. That was exactly enough. I still think about the cardinal sometimes. The one that landed on Ray's deck the morning Elliot sat with me, when neither of us had much to say. There's something about a small, ordinary thing showing up right when you need it that stays with you longer than the dramatic moments do. What Sasha did had a logic to it. I'd had months now to sit with that, and as painful as it is to admit, the plan made a certain cold sense. She knew I trusted her. She knew I didn't make a fuss. She had watched me defer, to institutions, to authority, to the idea that people who loved you probably knew best. For the better part of 4 decades, she built her scheme on the foundation of my habits, and for a while it worked exactly as she expected. That's the part I keep returning to. Not the betrayal itself, but the way it was constructed out of things that were true about me. My politeness, my patience, my willingness to believe the best. What she miscalculated was that those same qualities had a spine underneath them. 31 years in a classroom will do that to you. You learn to read what's actually on the page, not just what someone wants you to see. You learn that the most persuasive arguments are sometimes the ones most worth questioning. You learn that being kind and being sharp are not opposites, that in fact the sharpest people I ever knew were also, almost without exception, the most genuinely decent ones. Decency requires paying attention, and paying attention is its own kind of intelligence. I think about Abigail, too. 81 years old, doing her crossword in pen, locked inside a file that had decided she was someone she wasn't. There was nothing wrong with her mind. There was something wrong with the system that had stopped looking at her as a person and started looking at her as a category. What she needed wasn't sympathy. She needed someone to make a call. Sometimes that is the whole difference. Not grand gestures, not perfect timing, just someone willing to pick up the phone. The morning I walked to that front desk, I was not brave in any cinematic way. My hip ached. I was tired. I had slept badly for 10 nights in a row. What I had was not courage so much as a quiet refusal to accept a version of myself that wasn't accurate. I was not confused. I was not finished. I was not someone whose signature could be borrowed without her knowledge, and whose house could be sold while she sat in a common room watching someone else's television. That refusal, that insistence on the truth of who you actually are, is something nobody can take from you unless you hand it over. I almost handed it over. I came close in those first few days to believing that maybe this was just how things went, that maybe the people arranging my life knew something I didn't. That doubt is the real weapon in situations like this. Not the forged documents, not the scheme. The doubt. What I want to leave you with is this. Know yourself well enough that no one else's version of you can take root. Keep your numbers in your head. Keep your eyes on what's actually happening, not just what you're being told is happening. Be decent to the people around you, the Darnells of the world, who push a phone across a desk because something in your voice tells them it matters. And when the moment comes, and it may come, make the call. I made mine from a stranger's desk phone on a Tuesday morning, and it was enough.